Welcome to Booked, the bookstore education podcast brought to you by the American Booksellers Association. This episode is part of our Indies Introduced series, where we spotlight debut authors handpicked by booksellers from around the country. In each episode, a bookseller from the Indies Introduced panel will interview the author of a debut title featured in our program.
Hello, my name is Sophie Chen, and I'm a bookseller at Belmont Books, an indie bookstore located in Belmont, Massachusetts, right outside of Boston. I'm thrilled today to be talking to Holly Brickley, author of Deep Cuts. Holly Brickley studied English at UC Berkeley and received an MFA in fiction from Columbia University. Originally from Hope, British Columbia, she now lives in Portland, Oregon with her husband and 2 daughters. Deep Cuts is her first novel, on sale February 25th. Thank you for joining me, Holly.
Thank you so much for having me. This is such an honor.
Yeah, I just want to start off by saying I really love the book. It was just so well done.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. And so this book is such a love letter to music. So I'm curious hearing what's your relationship to music? Do you have a musical background, anything like that?
I don't. I'm strictly an appreciator like Percy, who's my protagonist. Um, I did often think about music journalism as a potential career, but I never pursued it because it would not allow me to make things up. So fiction is really my first love. I did grow up in a very musical family. My dad wrote pop and R&B songs. Chuck Brickley wrote songs for singers in the Vancouver, BC area throughout the 90s. My uncle, Tim Brickley, is also a really talented musician. So I just grew up in this environment where it was totally normal to hear a song on the radio and one member of the family to say that this chorus is so moving, and somebody else would say this, but then the verse is really drag, and we would like all analyze it together as a family, which it was some time before I realized that this is not how most people talk about music and actually find it rather annoying. Um, but I kind of kept it with me, just this impulse to listen really deeply to the songs that I love.
Yeah, definitely comes across in the book of that real appreciation of music,
Yeah.
which the whole book, for people who haven't read it yet, is structured sort of like a mixtape with every chapter named after a song that's featured in that chapter. So I'm curious, what was your process for picking the songs that were used in the book? And did you have any like favorites that didn't make the cut?
Oh my God, so many. So starting with the process, it was really dictated by the story. So I would have a narrative need to fill, and then I would pick a song that I thought could accomplish that. Which happened pretty naturally for the most part. I have enough songs just like taking up space in my brain. I think like a lot of people that I could just kind of pluck one out. Occasionally it was a struggle if I had kind of gotten myself into a corner. Like there's a chapter, Someone Great, near the end, which is an LCD Sound System song. And that I knew the song would have to do some heavy lifting because it was a real turning point for my character. And but I knew I wanted it to happen at a show. And so I was literally Googling like San Francisco live music 2007, like looking at set lists, trying to find the right song that could do what I needed it to. But then that song, the lyrics of that song and actually the music of that song really form the shape of her epiphany that she has. So now it's impossible to imagine it being anything else. Um, and then there were a few times where it was fully the other way around, where it was, I heard a song that inspired a narrative choice. That happened with the song What Makes You Think You're the One by Fleetwood Mac, which just came on like on my shuffle while I was in the shower. And I just thought, wow, this sounds like my characters talking to each other. And then I went back and inserted something that like a whole plot point came out of that. So the songs and the texts really they fed into each other in both directions, I would say.
Nice. And with such like a book that's so referential to music. So like I as I was reading each chapter would listen to the songs during it just for some context, and I also felt like it really sort of enhanced the whole experience. So I'm wondering, like, do you have any expectations of how readers will interact with the book?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I would do. But and I am hearing that a lot. Like I think that's great. Like I think a lot of people are stopping and listening to the songs. But I think that others kind of keep reading and then maybe later when they're in the car, they're washing dishes, then they'll put on the songs um and think about what they read earlier. I think that's fine too. And then I think some might not be interested enough in the music part of it to really explore beyond the text in that way. And I think that's okay. Like I think that the story will stand on its own. Um I personally find that hard to relate to, but I would be fine with that. Like I don't want to dictate how the reader does their thing.
And yeah, I want to talk a little bit about the characters in the book. Percy, the protagonist, I think is just such a strong, well-developed character who is incredibly opinionated and really vulnerable but guarded. And I'm curious to hear how her character developed.
Well, I started with the parts of myself that I hate. Uh, my critical nature, my complete lack of musical ability, and even more than that, my envy of people who have musical talent. Um, so I started with that and ran with it. She very quickly became her own person because the plot and the backstory were all fictional. So she it evolved from that. But that was the starting point to kind of explore the parts of my brain that don't make sense to me and haven't budged much. But I'm really glad you love her. I love her too. And she made me love myself more. I know that sounds cheesy, but yeah, I wrote my way through some stuff, I think.
And I'm also curious, just like how much do your musical opinions overlap with hers?
Like 100%, roughly.
I know I
I
was reading this and I was like, this is someone that knows music and has really strong feelings about music.
I have really strong feelings and I know my little corner of the music world. Like I don't consider myself an expert. I just know what I like and I think really hard about it. So yeah, but I had fun with this book. Like this book was a joy to write. And so I wasn't like doing research and I was just kind of doing whatever I wanted so that I didn't want to write about songs that I don't love. I think the most research I did was like San Francisco shows 2007. But then I
That's
picked
so
a song
cool.
I already love.
Yeah, I didn't realize that it was like so true to what was going on in history. Like those actual shows were happening, and
The
that's some really
actual
cool
shows
details.
did happen. I was at most of them. I was not at that one because I just needed that song. But yeah, that was at Mezzanine in San Francisco. Also, wait, there's one other thing where they didn't play. I don't think they played NYC. Interpol played NYC. Anyway, yeah, there. It's all real for the most part.
Nice. And then, so early in the book, Percy sort of redefines deep cuts, which I think is such a good title for the book as well. And she defines it as songs that really like cut to the bone and that like stick with you. So I'm curious if there are any songs or even books that you'd consider deep cuts.
Yeah, so anyone who knows me well would know that my first answer is this song called Couldn't Call It Unexpected #4 by Elvis Costello, which is a deep cut, I think, by the traditional meaning of deep cut and especially by Percy's meaning for me. It's on the album Mighty Like a Rose, but my favorite version you can find on YouTube at the Montreux Jazz Festival in 1991. It's like I can't even think about it without wanting to cry. It's a song about death and mourning, and it's very existential, but also very life affirming. Um, so that's my obvious answer. I would also say Nat King Cole's Christmas song, that song, Chestnuts Roasting, like the classic.
Yeah.
This is also an outtake. You asked earlier about songs that didn't make the cut. Um, I there's just his voice. There's actually a lot of songs by him that would qualify, but that's the one I hear the most. It's like his voice is like a pat of melted butter, just like sliding around this gorgeously balanced melody. And it makes me feel like I melt a little every time I hear it. Which especially that time of year, I'm always like carrying so much tension in my body. And it's just what a freaking amazing thing to be able to put on a song and have just be shot through with peace. You mentioned books too. So the one that comes to mind, obviously there's like Nick Hornby and a lot of influences for me, but the one that really feels like the deepest cut is called A Feather in the Breath of God by Sigrid Nunez. And it's her first book. I read it when I think I was a teenager, like my first year in college. I don't even know how I discovered it. But it just, because I was so young, it just kind of like wedged itself into my DNA, and I still think about it. And I think there are elements of my writing style that that book kind of shaped. So yeah, that would be that's my deepest literary cut, I think.
Nice. Yeah, I'm always so interested to hear about like those, yeah, like what really sticks with people when they're young and the way that that shapes just sort of the rest of your life and the things that stick with you. And I
Yeah.
think that was definitely a big part of the book of the way that music has sort of dictated all of their lives. And yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. And helped them communicate with each other when they would have been struggling otherwise because they were young.
absolutely. All right. Anything else that you want to mention or talk about?
Well, I'm just so thrilled to be an Indies introduced pick, and especially, just to be picked by booksellers who are the most important part of this whole ecosystem, I think. So just thank you. It's a
Yeah.
wonderful honor.
No, this book was definitely like an early favorite of everyone's.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Well, it was great talking to you. I
You
feel like I
too.
could talk music all day, but
I know. I want to know what your deep cuts are.
no, I absolutely blame you for getting me back into the shins like hardcore reading this book. I was like, oh, I forgot how good they are.
So good. So
So
good.
good.
All right. Have a
All right.
great day, Sophie. Thanks again.
Yeah, you too. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Booked, the bookstore education podcast brought to you by the American Booksellers Association. Don't forget to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast app. Additional educational resources can always be found on the ABA website at www.bookweb.org. Happy reading!